Welcome, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to tonight's event, Securing a Resilient Grid, the Role of System Services in the EU. My name is Dave Keating. I'm a journalist based here in Brussels, and I'm going to be guiding us through tonight's conversation about resilient grids. Now, as Europe transitions toward a climate-neutral, integrated, and resilient energy system, there's been a lot of focus on the deployment of renewables and how to connect them to the energy grid. Two very important things. But one element essential to the energy transition has been somewhat overlooked: maintaining reliability in an increasingly electrified and renewables-based system. That's going to be a big challenge. And as Europe integrates more wind and solar power, the grid's ability to withstand disturbances is weakening. Traditional system services such as inertia, frequency and voltage control, black start capability have long ensured stability, but they're now becoming less reliable. Their availability is declining as conventional power plants close. And recent incidents, like the Iberian blackout, may show how vulnerable the system can become when these functions are overlooked. To keep Europe's electricity secure and resilient, some stakeholders are arguing that system services should be better recognized and valued as core to energy resilience. The upcoming review of the EU Energy Security Framework presents an opportunity to recognize those system services as the main area of energy resilience. So, in tonight's event, we're going to talk about the role of system services in securing grid resilience and stability, and how market mechanisms and innovation can ensure their availability across Europe. To get us started, we're going to hear some opening remarks, scene-setting remarks, by Jesse Scott, a senior fellow at the European University Institute and also an adjunct professor at the Hertie School. Jesse is joining us remotely. Good evening. Jesse, I turn the floor over to you.
Dave, thank you very much, and thank you to Euractiv for the invitation. I hope the sound is good.
Clear.
Dave, I think you've given me a question about traditional system services in your opening remarks. And I think you've at once given me a straightforward and a tricky job. Let me take the straightforward part first. The traditional system services, inertia, frequency and voltage control, black start, are essentially how we provide ways of balancing the grid using stored energy control of the voltage and the hertz that travel around the system. Black start, which means the ability to start generating power without needing power to start a power plant. And all of these elements are, in fact, not no longer available. It's that the system services are the same. The operational stability needs that they have addressed are fundamentally the same in a grid, but the technologies providing them have changed. And that's because we are in an increasingly renewables-based system. This is where it gets tricky. System services have always been, let's say, part of the clockwork of power system operations. But they've mainly been provided in the past by the firm capacity from conventional fossil fuel generation plants. And to that extent, they were co-delivered with energy capacity into the system. And therefore, energy markets did not need to value and price those services separately. We're now moving to a world where we have more, arguably better technologies, but the difference is that the renewables-based system does not co-deliver those system services. So we're in a situation where we are, if we face a disturbance in the power system, be that the Iberian blackout, be that other reasons we may face disturbances, then we need synchronous controls, battery storage, rotating turbines, black start, demand side response, and we need the technologies and the services to manage that disturbance. That's what will deliver the reliability, the resilience that we're looking for in the energy security debate that's coming up in Europe. What we have at the moment are a set of market arrangements which essentially reward capacity, but not capability, services, system, operational values. In fact, those technologies at the moment are essentially supported in Europe by demonstration programs, by short-term procurement mechanisms. This is not yet a business model that can draw those technologies, whether deployed by grid operators or by power plant operators or by other actors, into the system as a whole. So I think I turn back to you, Dave, and say, I don't think there's any doubt from any stakeholders that we need to look at the provision of system operational services in the grid, that we need to look anew, but that the lively debate that we're likely to see amongst our panelists tonight is about how to create the market model, revenue generation, the attraction to those services, now that they are no longer co-delivered inherently with conventional generation. I hand it back over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Jesse. Yeah, I think that's great to get that overview to start off, because this can be quite a technical topic, but I think you've done a good job there of really explaining basically why this is needed, and particularly why this is needed at this exact moment. So let me now introduce the rest of our panelists to you. We have here to my left Jose Carlos Matos, who is the energy attaché at the permanent representation of Portugal to the EU. Next to him, we have Thomas Pellerin-Collin, who is the center-left, he was a center-left French MEP, also a member of the Industry and Energy Committee in the European Parliament. Down at the end there, we have Anis Turk, who is an Austrian Liberal MEP and also a member of the Parliament's Industry and Energy Committee and the rapporteur on energy grids, electricity grids. Then we have Michael Jesberger, who is COO of Transnet BW, which operates the electricity transmission grid in Baden-Württemberg. And finally, we have Javier Cavada, who is president of the Industry Association EU Turbines and CEO of Mitsubishi Power, CEO for Europe and the Middle East. And finally, we also have Jesse Scott, who still will be here with us on the panel. Now, you all will be able to ask your questions to the panelists using Slido. So that'll be, you'll type in your questions. You'll see a QR code just came up there on the screen. go ahead and scan that QR code with your phones. Then you can type in your questions. I'll receive them here on my tablet, and I will put them to the panelists at the end of the panel. So Jose, I'd like to start with a question for you. I mentioned at the beginning the total blackouts in Iberia, in Spain and Portugal, which was recently experienced. We still don't know exactly what caused it. There was an initial assessment by EU authorities, but even without knowing exactly what caused it, it did show citizens the vulnerability of our energy systems. And I think I was actually there in Spain when it happened, and it really wakes you up to how much we rely on communications and electricity, because it wasn't just the power that went out, it was also the cell phone service. So I actually didn't even know there was an Iberia-wide blackout for several hours. I thought it was just my building for a bit. So it showed all of us the importance of this grid stability. Generally speaking, what did that experience teach us about the need for resilient grids?
Well, thank you so much. Thanks for the invitation to Euractiv, and good afternoon, everyone. I think that we could, I would use your expression saying it was a wake-up call for something that we should long be awakened for. The system, we only have a notion on the fragility of the systems until things happen. Communications is one of those cases. We regard the redundant power supply system of communication antennas, local generators, they did not operate as long as they were expected. So this is a wake-up call to make us understand how fragile the system is and how dependent we are. Even if you say, my car is operating with fuel. Well, but if you want to go to the power pump, you will not pump it. So you're always dependent on the electricity. But it shows how fragile it is, despite all the advancements. And it underscored, in fact, the need for coordination, for more robust coordination between member states. We had a very, it was also a lesson learned between us and Spain, how we need to cooperate further to minimize the probability of these occurrences. It was a wake-up call to say that we have to advance on grid management to get more stabilization technologies for all of this. And it highlighted also one thing. We are talking here that, this is happening because of renewables, but as renewables were an outside player, but no, renewables can also play a role in stabilizing the system, okay? So it's not like a foreign player and then we have to add something. No, renewables also can play a role in that stabilization, and that this is important. And I would like also to stress, this was also important to get, and I'll get that idea, that is very important, the need not just to see the electricity market, but the electricity markets. There are several electricity markets. And normally we just think of, wholesale market. There are several electricity markets, and we are not used to value all of those markets, capacity, restoration, etc. And this reminds us that the energy trade and its several sub-markets are fundamental to ensure that supply delivers, on one hand, and the other hand, that demand is met. Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense. Tomas, let's turn to you for a perspective from the Parliament. We know that energy security is really a major concern right now, particularly since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. That was a big wake-up call for Europe, but also for other factors around the world. How can system services contribute to creating a more secure and resilient grid system in the face of all these new geopolitical challenges that Europe faces?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dave, and thank you to Euractiv for the invitation. The first thing I want to underline is actually how resilient our electricity grid is. We've experienced obviously something in Iberia, but we always need to compare ourselves with other parts of the world. One part of the world that we often compare ourselves with is the US. And if you remember, it was 5 years ago that there was a massive blackout in Texas. And the key difference between what happened in Iberia and what happened in Texas is that in Iberia, after a couple of hours, most of the electricity grid recovered. In Texas, they did not need hours, they needed days, even an entire week. And that is something that actually we can be proud of as Europeans. That doesn't mean that everything is perfect. That doesn't mean that there are no challenges. But what Fatih Birol, at the head of the International Energy Agency, calls the age of electricity. So we're no longer in the age of gas, according to the International Energy Agency. We have entered the age of electricity. That is a very good news for us Europeans, because first, we can generate electricity in Europe, while we don't really can generate gas for geological reasons, and there is no negotiation that is possible. And also because that age of electricity, with all its challenges that are going to come to, is a much, much, much better place for us Europeans to be in than the age of oil and the age of gas, where we rely essentially on our enemies continue to be kind to us until they want to stab us in the back. Jesse at the beginning mentioned the role that renewables play, but even if we did not have renewables, we will still be in a difficult situation when it comes to balancing the grid. First, now fossil gas is much more expensive. All the investments that were made throughout the 80s, the 90s, the noughties, the 2010s were assuming that we would get access to vast quantity of cheap Russian gas at 10 to 15 euros per megawatt hour. Now we are at 30 euros per megawatt hour, and now 30 euros is considered cheap by European standards. So gas has been still playing a big role in backup generation in Europe. We need to phase this out for obvious security reasons, because that gas is imported either from bully number one, Putin, or bully number two, Trump. But also from a strictly economical perspective, because the less gas power backup we need, because we have demand-side management, because we have batteries, because we've got clean firm power, because we have reactive pump hydro, all those solutions that are already there. So the less we rely on gas, the cheaper the electricity price, because we reduce the number of hours in a year where we actually have gas that is making the price of electricity. The second challenge that we are facing is climate change adaptation. We, humans, we have chosen for decades now to destroy the environmental conditions that allow human life on Earth. That is what we've been doing knowingly since the China report in 1979. We're going back to that report because that's the moment where we knew. And so that was more than 10 years before I was even born. The impact of that is that climate change is worsening. We're looking at +4, +5 degree warming for Europe. I'm not talking about the global average temperature. I'm talking about the increase of the temperature on the surface of Europe. That is something, by the way, that a lot of people do not know about, including a lot of MEPs, sadly, that Europe is warming around 2 times more than the average of the world. And so that leads to very different challenges. We see a big need for air conditioning in hospitals that is coming up for public health reasons. We see more forest fires that have an impact on the grid. So for all those reasons, we now need to face, not only in the south of Europe, but increasingly in the north of Europe, a summer electricity security challenge. And for the south of Europe, it's not only a summer, it can be a late spring, because the heat waves are now coming up as soon as the month of May and can continue as late as the month of September. And finally, we have the most direct threat that is currently there on a very minimal surface, which is the Russian threat. Russia has been already attacking the electricity grid through cyber attacks. They've been already attacking our physical grid through sabotage at sea. But let me be clear, what has been happening to Ukraine can happen to us. And so we need to build a grid to make sure that whenever Putin will attack one of us, we know that we have a resilient grid. There are areas that need to be better protected through air defense systems. There are areas that need to be better protected through reinforcement. So literally it means fortifying physically with concrete some parts of the grid in order to make them resilient to drones, even if they won't be resilient to missiles. And that also means being able to build the grid back up. And here, I really urge everyone, and I know that companies like Fortum in Finland are already doing that, but to learn from the Ukrainian experience. And that's not only a matter for the Central Eastern member states that are on the front line and that are actually doing that already. It is a matter also for the countries that may be the victims of Russian deep strikes. And so that countries like Germany, that's countries like France, but it can even be countries like Portugal. And just to end on this, there was recently a nice foresight exercise done by Le Grand Continent, which is a think tank linked to a famous school in France, the École Nationale Supérieure. And they were looking at what would be the Russian way to starve Europe from energy. And actually, Portugal was playing a big role in that specific scenario. But that leads us to think that there should be a priority for energy security now. And that energy security priority leads us in a conversation about more flexibility, about more resilience, and something that we are not ready yet to have, but is also a public discourse and a public discussion on what are the types of electricity that we will need to prioritize in those type of extreme scenarios.
Yeah, it's a good point about the resilience with the Iberian blackout. It's interesting. That was actually the second major blackout I lived through. 25 years ago, I was in New York City when there was a major blackout in the northeast of the United States and Canada. That was out for 2 days. We had an overnight period with no power, which meant looting. And actually in Barcelona, where I was, we had the power back on by before the sun went down. So that was actually an impressive thing. It could have been a lot worse, for sure.
Is that a coincidence that you went through 2 blackouts?
I don't know. Maybe it's me. Anna, so obviously when we're looking at the energy landscape in Europe and when we're looking at the grids, each European country has had different power backgrounds, made different energy choices. And so therefore we have different energy grids around Europe that we've been trying to link up, trying to have a more cohesive European energy grid system. In terms of the existing grids that we have right now, how do we keep them operating and managing smoothly?
Well, that's a really important aspect that you bring in there, because I think when we talk about the grid and when we talk about the fact that we need to invest a lot in our grid infrastructure, the first thing that comes, especially from people who, want to have some political, they want to make some political small change by going against the grid, by going against the energy transition. It's always the fact that we need to integrate renewables, etc. And that's all true and fine. But when you look at our distribution grids, it's actually 40% of our distribution grids that are over 40 years old. So we have to modernize anyways. And Tamar, you already talked about the fact that we also have to invest in our grids in order to make them more resilient to different types of threats, be that natural disaster or be that threats, military threats. So we have to modernize this grid anyways, even if we take renewables out of the equation. So how do we do that, and why do we have a problem at the moment? As you mentioned, energy and the electricity grid, it's not just a European topic. It's very much a team effort, because at the end of the day, most of the energy decisions and energy policy decisions are made on a national level, nation-state level. And that, at least for us European politicians, sometimes is a bit of a problem, because we try to fix things, but then, they're not really being implemented. They're being implemented in very different ways. And then you see some countries actually fixing things and other countries taking a different route and they're not fixing it. And because they've chosen different system, they're very worried about actually linking up with the other countries. There's financial reasons, there's political reasons, but we can get into that later. But to come to your question specifically, one of the issues that we run into in a lot of different countries is that it is not financially incentivized for DSOs, for TSOs, to actually invest in the modernization of their grid, in the digitalization of their grid, just purely based on how our regulation works and how the financing of the grids work. Why? Because in most countries, not all of them, but in most countries, it's better financially for a DSO, for a TSO, to actually build physical grids, because that's where they get the money back, than to invest in modernization. And that is a problem. So really, we need to have a regulation change in order to make sure that we actually incentivize TSOs and DSOs. And this is not saying, it's not them being mean or them not taking the right decisions. It's purely economics. So we have to change that in order to make sure that we actually modernize and make our grid as resilient as possible. Because again, this is not just about making sure that we are resilient. This is actually also about making sure that we are as efficient as we can be with the existing grids. And I'm curious and interested to hear from you in a second, because this is, again, we have such investment needs, and yes, we will need more capacity. No one negates that we will need new lines. No one does that. But the fact is, we have such high investment needs that it is important to make sure that we also try to lengthen the period of time that we need that investment in, meaning that if we now digitalize and modernize our grid, that also means that we will have more capacity in the existing grid, and we will be able to take a little bit more time in actually building out the physical grid, which, and that's my last statement, is also a good message for us, because, and I'm sure you can talk about this much more than me, but it takes a very long time to actually build a new grid, not just because we're waiting for permitting, etc., but because we actually have long waiting queues in the supply chain. So investing in modernization is not just good for our resilience, it's not just good for our efficiency, but it's actually really good financially for us as well.
Yeah, Michael, let's turn to you next, because of course for the electricity system operators, they have to deal with kind of the brunt of the effects of this. Why are system services important from a technical perspective?
Yeah. System services are it's a very abstract product, and it's difficult to explain. But on the other side, it's also visible. You can see right now, at the moment, that Elia makes a good job because they are providing us with the system services we need right now, because the lights are on. If the system services are not available, then the lights are off. And this has nothing to do with the power which is provided by the power station. It has something to do with functionality around this power provision. And let me allow an analogy. I would expect that most of us have a driving license and are driving a car. And all of us know that there is an engine, a gas-fired engine in the car, or an electrical drive in the car, and this delivers the power. But to drive the car, you need a steering wheel, you need a brake, you need lights. And without those services, you damage your car, or you cannot steer it and you damage it. So you always need the brake and the steering wheel, and during the night, the light. And these are services, system services, you need as a driver to bring or to drive a car from A to B. We have heard in the first statement about the electrical products like redispatch, reactive power, inertia, frequency control, etc. These are the electrical names for these system services. And you need all these services in your car. So Elia needs all the services in their region to keep the lights on. We need the brakes in the car, and it does not help if my brake is not working, and somebody from Lisbon or somebody from Warsaw is offering me the braking function because I need it in my car. So there are a couple of system services which I need in my control area from dedicated assets to keep the lights on. So there is a number of system services we can provide in the European market, but there are others I need close to me. I need them under my button. And this is difficult to explain because we believe that the market can help or will solve our technical problem we are facing. So we need to understand more the law of nature, the physics behind, to develop the system services in the future, because the source for those system services will change. In the old days, we have got it from the coal-fired power stations. They are switched off. In Germany, the nuclears are switched off. So the synchronous, the generators are gone. And now we have a lot of renewables in the grid. And now we need to get those system services out of the converters from the renewables or from dedicated assets we need to build to keep the system stable. And maybe we come to that point, and this would be my third and last topic, that we are, in the energy transition, we are confronted with a conflict of interest. Because those who are operating in the market, they have a business case. They want to make money. And they are investing in assets to generate money, a return out of the investment. The grid operators, they want to keep the system stable. And this leads, in some cases, to contradictory operational schemes. So a storage device on a sunny Sunday in the southern part of Germany helps us to keep the system stable because it works as an additional load. The prices are low, and we need load during Sunday because production will start on Monday, of course. But the same battery on a Monday, when the production is on, and we have a lot of wind in the grid, and a battery which is trying to load their capacity is counterproductive because it's adding load to the anyway high load. So we say those storage devices, they need to work always according to the grid stability needs. And of course, others are saying, I want to make money with it. And this is something we need to discuss and we need to solve, because then otherwise we are diverging in two different directions.
Javier, as a maker of turbines, you obviously have a keen interest in how grids should accommodate new sources of energy. What's your take, particularly on what we've heard so far?
I mean, as you can imagine, very familiar with all what is being discussed. I mean, we are all over the place about this. I heard several times the word wake-up call. I mean, I think that we definitely are receiving wake-up calls, but we're not fully awake. And I say, as an European, pan-European, Spanish living in London, so you have the worst of both sides, so in a way, so you allow me. Of course, I have a lot of family in Spain, parents, brother, etc. That day that happened, the blackout, I called my parents, I called my brother. Everybody was very relaxed. Everybody was quite happy. They said, okay, day off, no problem. So don't hurry up connecting again. So we were lucky that it was during the day. It was not a cold day. And Spain is not cold in April, I think it was. And it was middle of the week. So it's a kind of a nice half weekend. Nobody took it seriously, if you allow me. So it's from the person, from the students, from the government, the administrator, the national grid, the operators. It's not happening anymore because, as you know, the mix in Spain or in Iberia, Jose, you know very well, the way of managing the grid has changed a lot. So they have gone from having a very thin safety net, so going for all the renewables possible. That is always what we need to do. All the wind and all the solar we can deploy, but all the wind and the solar need the other side, need the brakes, need the steering wheel. In the UK, the national grid, they always say, sorry, I don't drink beer, but they say that in a paint, the power, the electricity is the beer, and the foam is the system services. They cannot drink beer without foam, so apparently. So, but in this case, without the foam, you don't have the drink you're looking for. You don't have the power, you don't have the lights on. And well, you were asking, I mean, representing the association of turbines, which is gas turbines, steam turbines, I mean, rotating equipment, frankly, that is, and of course representing Mitsubishi, Mitsubishi's, for those who know, of course, there are big three OEMs, one from Germany, one from the States, one from Japan. The three are in a totally unprecedented demand. So in a way that is around 5 times more demand than what we had before COVID, the previous 10 years. Well, the previous 8 years, if I am more accurate. In Europe as well, but in Europe things are a bit slower. As an European, I criticize myself. Security of the system. reliability of the system. I heard also several times about the danger, about the difficulties that are coming. I mean, I think you mentioned one bully, another bully. We have many bullies, and those who are friends of us, maybe they are not our friends tomorrow. I mean, so it's we are being dependent on the external is definitely not good. We need to be self-reliable. We need to have security of supply. And supply is not only electrons, it's all the system services, it's all the reactive power. And well, I represent an industry that is pure technology. If you allow me, it's European technology. I mean, all this technology has been born in this continent, and we are deploying it massively across the 5 continents. And flexibility, enabling more wind and more solar, giving all the services that wind and solar require, having the remuneration mechanisms. You mentioned it just a second ago, that no investor is investing if there is not a clear certainty of return of the investment, and we need certainty of remuneration. So it's how we're not talking only about the turbine, the gas turbine, the hydrogen turbine, the ammonia turbine. We're talking also about the steam turbines, long duration energy storage, seasonal storage, long-term storage, middle storage. We are looking, in my view, in our view as engineers, we're looking at the issue case by case. We are slicing down the market, slicing down. Let's look at solar, let's look at batteries, let's look at coal, let's look at nuclear. We need to look at system. If we don't look at system, we are totally lost. So we are really trying to solve different problems in different areas that are interacting together. And the system is way more simple than that. So indeed, I felt a bit sad when I heard that it's true, that we are damaging our climate for way before we were born, and we are not to stop it, not in this continent, I believe, but in other continents that have industrialized massively in the last 25 years. But also as a society, as a humankind, we have also decided that we are going to use a lot more electricity than before. We're electrifying processes, cement, aluminum, steel that are required mining. I mean, when we talk about renewables, don't forget that all that we need a huge supply chain. Batteries, steel for turbines. We have a lot of industries that require a big amount of power that is moving from fossil to electrify. To electrify, we need more electricity, obviously. Then we need to decarbonize. To decarbonize, we need a lot more wind, a lot more solar, a lot more hydro. Hydro doesn't have this problem. Hydro is the golden bullet. It's quite difficult to build geographically, but it's the perfect technology. Has a big turbine with a big generator providing all the system services. Then we have thermosolar or concentrated solar power that has also the mix. Financially, it's not happening at a scale because financially doesn't give the same payback as the other solution. So for that reason, system view from the European level, from the country level, from the technology side, again, we are purely delivering the technologies that the countries and the societies demand. So we are not, as you see what companies we are behind this association, we are not looking at one technology. We are looking at all what the society has been requiring and will require in the future. And we see that without turbines, lights are off. Lights are off today, tomorrow, and in 20 years from now. They don't need to be running all the time like before. But let's not forget that countries in our union, in the European Union, are having half of the power coming from coal. Some of them are 3/4 coming from coal. And well, we have the transition, just to be simplistic, from coal to gas is reducing 67% the emissions, 67%. If you add wind and solar, the gas is going to be running 1/3 of the time. So then you are getting from 100 to 33 to 11, and that's a transition in my view. And again, we are in a planet that is getting not cooler in a climate way or politically way. So we are more alone or need more independency or more autonomy. And well, we need to plan for much worse conditions than what we have seen the last 10 years or the last 20 years. We need to plan for the crises to come, because the wake-up call are not going to stop.
It's certainly not cooler in a political way, that's for sure. Jesse, I'd like to bring you back into the panel. So at the beginning, you were walking us through why the old systems aren't going to work anymore like they did before. So inertia, frequency and voltage control, black start capability. Where are we right now in terms of a transition? Why are those no longer working? And where are we in the process of finding a replacement for this new era that we're in?
I think there was a slide that came up when I first spoke, Dave, which may help us answer this. Those services are still needed and are still available, but they are not delivered at the volumes we need into the electricity system in the way that they traditionally used to be. They now need to come from additional technologies. Now, we've got gas turbines in that mix. We've got a complex set of roles for batteries. We've certainly got demand side response as part of the balancing of the system, essentially reducing the demand on the system. We've got inverter-based renewables, grid forming. That means that they can actually help balance the grid as opposed to merely synchronize with it. These are the same operational asks that we have had in the grid in an increasingly complex grid in a growing electricity demand system, but they are not provided in the way that they used to be by large volumes of fossil fuel dispatchable firm power, because we are decarbonising for all of the reasons that have been emphasised. Let me build on that. We've heard very much from the members of parliament, quite rightly, about the opportunities in this situation. The opportunities for decarbonisation. That's an existential, essential. The opportunities for resilience in the energy system. The opportunities to be efficient. I think there's a further opportunity, and that's actually for Europe to use its advanced position in the energy transition, particularly in electrical systems, to deploy technologies, many of which are European technologies, and essentially secure leadership in those technologies into what is going to be a massive global market. It was already cited that Fatih says this is the age of electricity. I'm sitting tonight in Delhi, in India, which is the largest synchronous power system in the world. If we have challenges in Europe, we are going to have challenges in India. There are EU-India trade talks underway. We hope they will be followed by investment talks. There is clearly a space for technology markets inside Europe, if we can get our rethink of the energy market right, and beyond Europe. Two more quick points. The energy market that we essentially are operating in today was designed around conventional dispatchable firm fossil fuels. It's out of date. It was also, frankly, designed by British neoliberal economists in the UK in the 1980s. I would argue that that is out of date. It's a long time ago, and we now have a different situation between the UK and the rest of Europe. So maybe it's not the best heritage. Last point, the IEA has been doing very important work thinking about the resilience of the energy system as part of the energy security agenda. And as I was at a working group at the end of September on this, the big focus of discussion was the growing number of extreme weather hazard events. In other words, climate impact, as Thomas has stressed. In those circumstances, one of the key issues is the insurability of parts of the energy system. And the insurability of the system depends a lot on essentially calculations about its reliability. The less reliable, the less resilient, the fewer system services technologies that we have deployed, the more expensive it is going to be to insure and indemnify for coping with the crises that we will certainly face for all the reasons that have been illustrated. Very round numbers, in the cost of capital for an energy project, insurance has gone from under 5% of the total cost to more in the range of 15%. So that's a rising trend. we can save money, we can lead in technology markets, we can certainly develop those globally.
Anna, Jesse was mentioning that the energy market systems that we've adopted in the EU are out of date. So you could argue that the legislation's out of date as well. So let's talk about some policy solutions. I mentioned that you're the rapporteur for electricity grids. We've also got the upcoming review of the EU energy security framework. What might be possible in terms of EU policy to recognize system services, the role that they play in keeping the energy grid stable?
I think having a grid package is the first step, because, and I think you mentioned this very well in your opening remarks, that what we saw, in my opinion, was that we were pretty quick and very clear, also politically, in changing the input, changing the source over the last few years towards renewables. But we didn't change the system with it. And I think that is one of the reasons why we're running into problems now. Because we didn't finance the grid build-out, the build-out of storage, in the same way as we financed the renewable build-out. We didn't incentivize it in the same way. And instead of changing the system in tandem, so to say, in parallel, and realizing and talking about the fact that this is a system change, we pretended, especially politicians, not me, I wasn't there yet, but politicians overall, I think we have to take collective responsibility for that. We all pretended that, you know, if we build enough solar panels and if we build enough wind farms, then we'll be fine and we'll have a great clean system. And by the way, the sun and the wind, they don't send bills, energy will be cheap, etc. So the fact that we now have a fully fledged political conversation about grids, I think is a first good sign. And I have to admit that as terrible as I'm sure it was for anyone who lived through it and for anyone on the Iberian Peninsula, I think it wasn't just a wake-up call. I think it was actually very helpful for us to push that grid agenda. So what are the opportunities? I think, as you just mentioned, we have two and even more really big energy legislation, or at least packages coming up. That is, on the one hand, the grid package, which we're eagerly awaiting. On the other hand, security of supply, which we hear is not just going to focus on energy sources, but much more than that, and actually focus a lot on system as well, which is a good sign. But we also have the question of energy efficiency coming up, which I'm sure is going to help us in pushing the third aspect that we need in this whole system forward, which is storage, as you mentioned as well. So I think we have everything lined up in the right way. Now the question is, will we have the right solutions? But just if I can stay with the grid package for just one or two examples of what we can do. What we are seeing is that, as I mentioned, we do see the grid being strained quite a lot, and I think there's 2 points to that. One is the distribution grid, and here I think we have a real opportunity to also support nation states in developing better planning processes, better financial instruments from the European perspective. Now we won't see, I think. I don't have a crystal ball, but I don't think that we'll see European legislation that goes straight down to the DSO level, because nation states will never agree to that. But we will definitely see pushes for the nation states towards certain areas. But what we can, in addition, do on the European level is make sure that the deployment of grid is happening as efficiently and as fast as possible. That includes the question of permitting, which I'm sure we've talked about quite a lot in general in debates before. But what is most important, I think, is to make sure that the interconnecting needs that we have, and I'm not talking about any fictional idea of, an interconnector there might be nice. No, we're talking about actual needs based on numbers and based on consumer needs. Those needs are not being met right now. And I think we have a real opportunity here to adapt our policy in a way that makes sure that there is a combination, particularly in the planning process, to make sure that we have the bottom-up information that is so desperately needed, that we can only get through TSOs, through DSOs as well, and through kind of national plans, but combine that with more of a, let's say, top-down oversight to make sure that we don't just end up with a mosaic, or not even mosaic, but more of a patchwork from different national views or even regional views in some senses that don't necessarily fit together in a whole system, but that we actually end up with a proper European plan for a European grid. And I think there's a real opportunity there, and I'm really looking forward to what the Commission is going to propose, but I can certainly say that the Parliament is going to do its best to push for that in the future.
Yes, we eagerly await what the Commission might put forward. Thank you a lot for that. I think you have to run now to your taxi.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, I have to go straight to the airport. I'm sorry, but thank you so much for having me.
No worries. Thank you so much for joining us. A round of applause for Anna. Jose, leading off of what Anna was just saying, do you think within the Council, is the Iberian blackout being seen as a motivator, something you can point to and say, see guys, we need to do this, look what almost happened. I think you could say, look what could have been a lot worse, and the next time it could be. Are other member states, other than Spain and Portugal, taking that lesson seriously? And I also wanted to ask you what Anna said about having EU legislation that goes straight down to the DSOs, that member states will never support that. Do you agree with that?
Okay, so number one, so we have a document, council conclusions from the Polish presidency, where the Iberian blackout was mentioned as an issue of security of supply. So I can imagine that, well, it wasn't unanimous, but the vast majority of member states acknowledged the document. So I can imagine that, yes, most member states are sensitive to this issue. I must stress, however, that when we talk about energy security supply, we tend to have a very national view, and that is not, from our point of view, healthy. We shouldn't be concerned about how should I say, anatomized or a dispersed energy security or energy sovereignty. We shouldn't have 27 energy sovereignties. We should have a single, a shared, a common one. Of course, with regional aspects that I can understand that you need to address local specifications. Either you're, like us, a bit more peripheral or you're in the center of Europe. I can understand that. But the basic principle is accepting that we need a single view that we can share this security and this sovereignty with each other. It's cheaper, it's more competitive, it's best for everyone. That's one of the things. Now, going deep to the distribution level, I think it may be difficult in the sense that we cannot even work closely at the regional level. Well, we work well with Spain, but not much beyond that. First, we still have to work on regional approaches at the TSO level, and who knows, in the future we can go deeper on that. But each step at a time, it's okay.
Yeah, Tomas, I think it's true that on a kind of general level, I think most people can understand why managing energy at EU level makes energy more secure, it makes it cheaper, and it makes it more sovereign. However, the choice of energy sourcing is not an EU competence, it's a national competence without a change in the treaties. What can EU policy do to try to even out these difficulties that we have with the grids, particularly when, I mean, you said that the cooperation doesn't go much further than Spain. I think you're referring to some of the difficulties with France that has not been very cooperative about this with its neighbors. How do we get over this national government obstacle that we keep encountering at this?
I think the first thing we need to do is to zoom out and to understand the level of similarity that actually we have in Europe on that. If we zoom out, I'm borrowing that from Michael Liebrecht's recent talk, keynote at the Bruegel Energy Conference last Friday. Essentially, we have three revolutions happening at the same time in the electricity world. So that's the GSUs, the generation, the storage, and the usage. We have a revolution in the way we generate electricity globally. I mean, that is not only a European phenomenon. And that is really mostly onshore wind, offshore wind, solar PV now, but coming up, enhanced geothermal systems, ocean energy can also play a role at least a later stage. But we already have a revolution there, and that revolution is well supported by a new framework on which we can improve on some elements, but we have, for instance, the Renewable Energy Directive that is delivering what we need. Then there's the issue of storage, where we clearly need to make a little bit of improvements there at the EU level. For instance, if there is a big member state that want to have backup capacity, ensuring that we can have an approach that allows batteries to compete with gas would be a good thing, for instance. Just a random example. And then usage. We have a genuine revolution in the way we use electricity. Historically, electricity was only about 15 to 25% of the overall energy mix. And still today, the number one energy source that we consume in Europe is oil, and the second one is gas. And that is true for pretty much any member state. There is no exception to the fact that oil is number one everywhere, and gas is number 2 or 3, depending on the national choices that were made. When it comes to the usage of electricity, the EU currently has a very good framework that it is about to dismantle. And I'm especially thinking of the CO2 standard for cars regulation, where the EU is about to shoot itself in the foot for party political reasons and a choice on one part of the Christian Democrats to make an alliance with the far right, and therefore to please the far right and to endeavor in that kind of Russian disinformation campaign around against electric vehicles, and that is a big threat. The way it comes to grids, I mean, it's much easier to do grid planning if you know where the generation units will be, and if you know where the usages will be, and if you know how you will deal with storage, at least to some extent. So to me, my first call, even before we start discussing grids, is to make sure that we keep the development of renewable generation on track, and that is about implementation. I hope we can also find the political courage in enough people in the EPP to stay true to their own roots, which is to conserve what works. And to be clear, the CO2 standard regulation does work. Just to share one thing, again, some people have the impression that Europe is some kind of Greta Thunberg island. No, really, that is when I listen to some of my colleagues, not friends, in the European Parliament from the PFE group, so the Putin puppets, they are telling us that we do that to please Greta Thunberg. I'm sorry. If you look at electric cars, in terms of share of the car market that is coming from battery electric cars, currently the EU is at the same level as Indonesia. The EU, the share of battery electric cars sold in Europe is 2 times lower than Vietnam. Vietnam, which is a country that is 3 times poorer than Bulgaria. So there is that electric car revolution that is happening all over the world, and the EU is about to do a terrible mistake that will have a knock-on impact on the grid. Because obviously you don't plan the same kind of grid if you consider that by 2035, half of the cars in Europe will be electric, and by 2040, all of them will be. Then if you have the choice for essentially running on oil, but calling that PHEV, so plug-in hybrid, or even more odd as an engineering choice, thinking that electrofuels have a role to play when it comes to run transportation, which will also lead you to a very, very, very different electricity grid. So where do we go from there? The thing that gives me hope is that this is mostly a political problem. It's not an engineering problem. It's mostly a political problem that we need to solve. Anna had to leave, but I want to congratulate the work that she's been doing over the last month, because the coalition that she built for her initiative report on grids is the type of coalition that we need. It is, by the way, the same coalition that voted for the European climate law last week in Parliament. And it is a coalition of people who believe in Europe, in democracy, and in science, which is a good place to be when you need to negotiate. The question is, where do we go from there? I hope we can have that same political coalition. I'm actually quite pessimistic on having that coalition when it comes to electric cars. I'm optimistic to have that coalition when it comes to the grid. However, because there are still today among the Christian Democrats even people with a scientific background, medical doctors, biologists, engineers, to understand that we need to be rational when it comes to those choices. At the end of the day, to manage to me, I mean, it's interesting that Anna used the word mosaic, because when I was still a teacher, that was actually the conclusion of my course. The conclusion of my course is that we need to go from a patchwork of 27 national policies to one single European mosaic. And in a mosaic, like a good mosaic, it's not everybody's the same. We have different colors, but they fit in a way that makes sense. I actually never talked about nuclear with Anna, but I assume like most Austrians don't like nuclear. And as a pro-European, I do respect the sovereign choice of Austrians not to have nuclear, just like the Portuguese choose not to have nuclear, the Danes did that choice. Obviously, the choice in France is different as it is in Bulgaria. But it is the way we can organize that mosaic, the way we can build synergies from that, that will ensure that together we will be able to be successful in delivering the clean energy revolution that we need. But for that, we need to, I mean, at the end of the day, it's being united in diversity. The unity is on the usage. The unity is on the way we will generate 85% of the electricity, give or take, because the share of nuclear will be around, I mean, we don't know, it's a political choice, but let's say 10 to 20%, depending on the political choices that are made. So a small minority, but still a significant one. And we can build that unity when it comes to our approach to the grid and when it comes to our approach to the energy security dimension. And to me, that is the way we can build the mosaic. We already have some nice pieces that we need to protect, CO2 standard for cars, renewable energy, and now we are discussing what will be the shape and the color of the grid piece of the puzzle, or of the mosaic rather.
Thanks. I mean, I guess it's clear that Greta Thunberg is running Indonesia and Vietnam as well, I suppose.
I've been told, indeed.
All-powerful.
Or Ethiopia, because Ethiopia last year banned the imports of internal combustion engine. So
She's everywhere. She's busy.
yeah.
Just a reminder, if you guys have questions for the panelists, put them in on Slido, and I will ask them via the my tablet here. Javier, let me ask you, so we've been talking about policy, but now I want to switch to investment, because everything that we're talking about here requires money. It's a question of where that money is going to come from. How do you think that market mechanisms can incentivize investment and innovation in system services? Thinking about the ETS, but maybe other tools as well.
Thank you for that, Dave. I mean, definitively, I love what Thomas was mentioning, that it's a political challenge, but not a technology challenge. And the same happens for the investment. The investment has all the technology choices already available. That's why when we talk to political bodies or government bodies or regulator bodies, we ask to have a system view, a systemic view. So get a helicopter view, because indeed, you mentioned the EV cars coming. I mean, EV cars connected every night in the grid are going to be changing completely the shape of the grid, much more than the revolution that Jesse was proposing that I would love to support. I mean, to come to a totally new design of the grid, that is the grid that was designed and we are enjoying today, has nothing to do what we should have or what we need. And definitely, when you are looking at where to invest, how to invest, you need to look at pockets of business that you can capture. So, but let's not forget that to put those mechanisms and those incentives to invest, we believe, as technology people and companies, that you need to have the ultimate goal, that is energy security. I mean, energy security is about being reliable, being able to adopt and welcome all the solar and wind, as renewables are the most amazing technology in terms of low cost of fuel, because there's no fuel, but there is a lot of unreliability and a lot of lack of system services that you need to complete. So to be able to invest, I can tell that due to solar mass production that started 20 years ago, and the cost of PV panel reduced around 90% in 2 years, in the early 2000s. 10 years later, wind. So there are not too many incentive mechanisms needed to build wind, solar. There are a lot of mechanisms needed to build offshore wind. Floating offshore wind is even more. Storage is never going to happen without system mechanisms. We see a bit, I heard yesterday about a tsunami of batteries coming to Germany. I wish, because indeed in the UK it has happened 10 years before in a way. But you need to have mechanisms that reward the defense of the security of the grid. And I need to a bit of disagree, not disagree, but at least to challenge what I hear about having one. I know that the mosaic sounds much better, but having one complete view of Europe just as a citizen is impossible. I mean, we all know that not only countries, Joseph was mentioning Spain and Portugal, we know our neighbors. Technology-wise, they're very different neighbors. Also, there is a big mountain line in the middle, but also different sovereign choices, but also regionally. There are regions which are very rich in hydropower. There are regions which are very rich. They have a power plant already built. There are regions that have a nuclear plant. There are, well, how do you make it flat? So 10 years ago, we were talking about microgrids and being able to zoom in and optimize as local as we can. Solar, wind, batteries, a cable in case it doesn't work, which is really what comes to the thermal power plant or the rotating equipment. So you need those incentives that reward all that high voltage support, inertia, reactive power, all these system services that make all the system work. And again, it's not looking at one technology. It's been totally neutral on the technology. And I like to say in this statement that the caveat, because I know that I have a bit sometimes the label in a table like this, or in a stage like this, I am representing one technology. I believe our company has 700 portfolio technologies, so and renewables, and fossil-based, and hydrogen-based, and ammonia-based, and a lot of that. But what is happening here is that the society is getting ready for a lot of crises coming, a lot of instability coming to the way of life that we have, politically, technology, a lot more electricity being demanded, a lot of, I mean, the problem that we are highlighting now is not new, but the scale of the problem is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So I tell you that this problem is bigger now than 1 year ago, and it's going to be bigger next year. And that's, I tell as a citizen, is what are we gonna do? So, and I tell you that the engineering firms, the engineering companies, with thousands and thousands of jobs and manufacturing locations in the EU, we are all ready to support those investments to deliver. But for the investors to come and invest, they need to have certainty that when there is a political shift in one country, always member states come every 4 years, every 8 years, things don't change. And that's unreliability is incentivized in other regions. I'm not thinking about Indonesia or Vietnam, but I'm thinking in the Middle East or the States, which are sucking all the capacity from all the technologies. And yes, my fear is that we have all the knowledge, all the capacity, all the brains, all the ambition, but we are missing the motion. And the motion, in my view, are those incentives to make sure that we are greedy and we make sure that our power is always available. So be ready for much worse than what we are experiencing, because what we are experiencing now is going to get worse.
Michael, how do you think that we can incentivize the investments that will be necessary to improve the situation, particularly since those investments, they're quite big, what's needed?
The investors, they are looking for a high profit margin and, of course, for a minimized operational risk. And if we can provide them with a market design which delivers exactly this, then I would say there's enough money around which will then be invested in those assets which are delivering the services we need. A second important point is the continuing market design over 10 or 12 years without any changes, so that they have the security that the market design remains stable during their investment. And when we talk about storage, about batteries, the batteries they will last around 12. They have a life cycle of 12 to 13 years. After that, they are trash, or maybe good for a second life. But then we have to exchange it. So the investor, then they need a stability for the next 12 to 13 years that they can make enough return and a higher return compared to other investment possibilities. And this is something we have to guarantee. Otherwise, I would expect they're investing in something else.
Jesse, when we're thinking about emerging technologies that can help solve some of these problems, so we've talked about the policy, we've talked about the investment needs. What are some future tech that can help us iron out these difficulties, maybe even artificial intelligence, really looking into the future that could help in providing essential system services?
I think I would slightly challenge the premise there, Dave, by saying we're in a situation where the sooner we deploy the technologies we have, the better. No question. Visibility in the system, operational information will improve efficiency. And there's a role for AI, amongst other technologies, there. But we need to approach this from a point of view that we have a lot of technologies. We're just not creating the investment space for them. I'm listening to this debate, and I challenge a little bit the word certainty. I think what investors need is confidence. I don't think you need a certainty of a return on investment, but you need confidence about the direction of change, the pace of change, the opportunity for a return on investment. And that brings me to hearing many echoes in today's discussion of a debate 10 years ago, 15 years ago in Europe about capacity markets. Capacity markets were about having extra power generation that was available for when we needed it, and how you would remunerate its availability even if it wasn't actually needed to generate energy. And that turned into a debate about the role of the EU, the role of member states. We've also had a history of debates in Europe about whether to base investments, particularly for new and complex technologies that can perform many functions, like batteries, which can be a balancing, a storage, an ancillary market service, whether to base those in the rate-based grid investment model or in the more market generation model. That's an echo that's worrying me, because we want to have a market that adopts the capability, operational service challenge that we've been discussing, and the technologies are available today. It's the capacity designed energy market which is not allowing space for those. I'm a little bit concerned that we will now spend a lot of time discussing what should be rate-based, what should be for power plant operators to invest in. That complexity is a structural factor in the EU, and probably that's what's holding us back more than EU member states, more even than the availability of technology. So Dave, I know I'm not quite answering your question, but I'm trying to come back to what seems to be the tricky hub of this issue. If we are to move forward with some policy solutions, let's say within the next year, that are sufficient to start to build that confidence. One of the reasons that we've been fiddling around the edges with funding for demonstration projects, minor procurements and so on, is because we haven't addressed and haven't resolved some of those design questions.
Well,
That's the nature of the debate about capacity markets. Capability markets is where we need to go.
Jose, when we're thinking about the short-term actions that we can take, what do you think is most important, both at EU level and national level, to get us in the ideal place we would like to be 1 year from now that's feasible?
Getting a really nice package and legislative proposals which are consensual between Commission, Council, and the Parliament. I think
1 year.
In 1 year. Why not? From a market's perspective or from a technology?
Either one.
Okay, well, I can tell you what we've been doing in Portugal. We are actually, it's a top-down approach. But all solutions, technology solutions that we thought we had some time to deploy, more Black Start, more StatCom, more etc. Let's not wait more, let's just do it. And because we need to ensure security of supply. So it's a bit the appeal that just, well, let's do it. But it does not replace the thing that markets do so well, which is optimizing the solution. So it's not as the system gets more and more complex and more integrated, we cannot double Black Start capacity every 10 years, or we have to start having, we need more mechanisms and market mechanisms so that the cost of the system gets optimized. Or else we're the simple solution is let's build redundancies, and in the end it may get more expensive, and it probably will, more expensive than it should, and in the end, you and me and everybody pays for that, right?
Thomas, what do you think is a realistic time frame for a grids package that could make a difference?
To be honest, I would rather focus on the quality of the content than the timing when it comes to that. Just to be clear, I'm very much in favor of going fast on some elements. I'm currently the social democratic lead on the Russian gas regulation that the Commission proposed in June and that I hope it will adopt in December. And in Parliament, we needed to have what we call in Parliament the shadow meetings, so the meetings between the different political groups to get our ducks in a row when it comes to the Russian gas regulation. And the first shadow meeting on that regulation was September the 8th, and the final deal was reached on September the 13th, which may not be unprecedented, but let's say it's quite rare for Parliament, especially this Parliament, to find an agreement in 22 days. When it comes to grid, I mean, there is not not yet at least, a life-threatening necessity that will force us to get a deal in 12 months rather than 16, to be clear. So first, I just want to make sure that we have a pro-democracy, a pro-European coalition in Parliament. That is the most important thing, because here again, when the EPP chooses to go for the European Destruction Coalition with AfD, they need to find an agreement with people that support Putin, people that applaud Trump, people who believe that vaccines are bad and that climate change is a hoax. So that obviously leads you to a very different conversation that is essentially divorced from reality. So the first priority is to make sure that the coalition we're going to have in Parliament to decide on the grid package is the same coalition that Anna built for the grids on initiative report, and I'm hopeful that we can get there. And then, I mean, yeah, I mean, it is really for me the quality of the regulation directive. We'll see that matters first and foremost. And at the same time, we can also continue our work on the Connecting Europe facility for energy. That is a big part of the puzzle too, and that will ease part of the financing through possibly, I mean, the most common way for the EU to play a role there is through subsidies. I think we need also to look at more innovative and blended finance. I would make the case that the EU sometimes also need to invest in equity. So having equity investment from the EU into TSOs could be actually something that is quite helpful. Also to help TSOs manage the debt to EBITDA ratio that has been increasing recently. And also see what we can do with the EIB, with other national promotional banks to have long-term investment and to reduce the cost of capital. Because whatever we're talking about here, when it comes to producing more electricity through wind power, solar power, when it comes to energy efficiency, when it comes to grid development, when it comes to storage, when it comes to electrification of heat and mobility, those are all capex intensive. So those are all investments that will be much cheaper if we can reduce the cost of capital, generally speaking, in our economy, and more specifically for those projects. And I think it's good that we have that conversation at the same time to make sure that we can have a genuine deal on electricity grids that does not only look at the regulation, which is a very, very critical part, but that also looks at the types of financing, from equity and grants to counter guarantees, in order to make sure that the investment can be done at the lowest possible cost. Because at the end of the day, that is what we need, like to deliver the cheapest, cleanest electricity we can for the Europeans that need electricity to free themselves from oil and gas dependence.
Javier, what would you like to see from the grids package that would make the rollout of wind power, give it a boost, and make it done in a stable way?
Definitively, we need to get the same target as Thomas was mentioning, to have the cleanest possible power, more affordable power, more available power, and more secure power. So I mean, if it's not secure, it's not going to happen. So I mean, if we, again, it's repeating a bit, but if we focus on solar and wind, and we don't remember that without the whole system services, which is 50% of the capacities, then it's not going to happen. And I want to also say break a rule here, that there are some technologies that are considered, okay, this technology is good, that technology is that. Again, the technology I'm representing is not that I'm bringing my book here. Is the technology that is occupying around 85% of all the investments globally. 85% of the investments in new energy today are happening in the technology that is not linked to any fossil fuel. In contrary, is a technology that enables wind and solar to be deployed and not to be curtailed. Because we have had in some grids that we have deployed enormous amount of wind, enormous amount of solar, even pumped hydro plants that are having to be curtailed. So the new grid, the new package, needs to recognize that there are technologies, and I have not said in the last 1 hour plus, I have not heard the word hydrogen. I mean, there is a molecule that can be totally autonomous, can be produced with solar, can be produced with wind, can be produced with any excess of electricity, clean electricity that you have. You are really totally isolating yourself from the influence from external forces, or dark forces, if you allow me to say. And that hydrogen just can be, frankly, blended into our existing pipeline, up to 10% without any notice. In every power plant that is existing today, in the strategic nodes of the grid of today, in 70% of the countries in the Union, are in where the thermal plants are, you can already start to blend up to 30% old installed fleet, 50% whenever there is a small conversion, 100% when there is enough volumes of hydrogen. So on top of that, all the coal-fired plants, all the thermal plants, all the nodes are in a design grid that requires all the services that those plants were giving. So you can also replace them by small interventions, making them become a synchronous condenser, giving an inertia delivery. So make a grid that is not only looking at, okay, the grid needs to be the electricity needs to be the lowest carbon possible, the lowest cost possible, and giving the maximum security. But again, if you look only at 1 or 2 or 3 technologies that are amazing, but they are not complete, then your car is going to be moving, but it's not going to turn left or turn right, and you're going to crash.
And finally, Michael, what would you like to see from the grids package that would make your life easier?
How much time do I have? No, maybe the most important topics. We are connected in Europe. We are running the transmission system all together, from Portugal to Ukraine and from Norway down to Italy, and for good reasons. And this gives a lot of advantages for all of us with regard to energy exchange, cost reduction, and grid stability. So there's a long list. Now we are changing our energy system, and I think it's important that all the member states understand that this has a lot of advantages for Europe. And those arguments, what is in for me, should then lead to a European energy policy where all the member states agree with. And this would be one wish. Secondly, we are changing our generation structure. So the generation of the future is located in different places and is connected to a different voltage level, predominantly on the low voltage, medium voltage, and high voltage, so on the distribution side. And this has significant impact on our future target topology of the grid. So we need to understand what do we change on the generation side, where are the generators located of the future, what is going to happen on the consumer side. We learned heat pumps are coming, e-mobility is growing, expecting also that cooling is becoming a big topic. So the consumption structure is changing, the generation structure is changing, and if we understand this Europe-wide, then we can come to an optimized transmission and distribution grid. And this is, let's say, the second big wish I would have. And the third one, and then I'll stop, is that we understand how we are going to finance it. How much money will it cost, and where's the money coming from? And here I have the impression that a lot of people who are in this discussion, they avoid to touch this topic. That we really talk about euros we need this year, next year, in 5 years, in 10 years, until we have decarbonized our energy system, until we have brought it back to a really stable, future-oriented grid, and that we, thirdly, have it modernized in a way that we really can say is fit for the future. And now I stop.
Great, thanks for that. And thank you to all the panelists for some really interesting insights here. I think we definitely have our work cut out for us, but also there are clearly some legislative opportunities coming up to address these issues in EU policy and in a way that can also make them addressed in national policy. So I think some good news overall that we've heard tonight. How about a round of applause for our excellent panelists? And thank you to all of you for joining us here this evening. I now invite you to continue the conversation over cocktails outside these doors. Have a great night.